Will the committee supply please come to order? This section of the committee supply will now resume consideration of the estimates for the Department of Finance. Questioning for this department will proceed in a global manner. The floor is now open for questions. The Honourable Member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be back with the Minister and appreciate the presence of the staff here to support him. Thanks to all for being here today as part of this committee. I just want to start by, and today we'll be focusing on hydro specifically, and I would like to start by having the Minister share some of his perspectives around some of the increases to operating and administrative costs that we've seen at hydro. We've seen specifically last year, and this is stemming from discussions, or some of this information stems from discussions during our committee where I had the opportunity to speak with the CEO of Hydro to learn a little bit more about these concerns. And through those discussions, we did learn that operating and admin expenses had gone up by 8% in the last fiscal year. And the CEO identified that the estimated increase for operating and admin costs at Hydro this year were estimated to be north of 11%. Those increases in operating and admin costs translate directly, as the Minister would know, into increases in energy rates for Manitobans. In fact, the 8% jump in operating and admin costs last fiscal, which amounted to about $52 million, is the equivalent of 2.8% rate increase. And of course, with an 11% increase this year projected, we can expect, again, more of these pressures, and we're seeing these costs seemingly continuing to go up. So my question, quite simply, to the Minister to begin with is, does he have concern about the escalating operating and administrative expenses at Manitoba Hydro?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'll seek direction from you. Clearly we're in the Department of Finance estimates here, and I think the line of questioning the member opposite is going down is directly relative to the operations at Manitoba Hydro. And those are exactly the type of questions I would think would be addressed at a committee of Manitoba Hydro, a committee of Crown Corporations. That's why we have the Crown Corporation committees to ask those detailed types of questions. So I'll seek some clarification from the chair on that, if we're going to be spending the afternoon talking about the details of the operations of Crown Corporations, where I thought we'd be in discussions about the Department of Finance. So I guess I'll leave that with you, Mr. Chair. I will say to the member's question, in general terms, I mean, we're always concerned about operations of government, operations of Crown Corporations. We were elected on a mandate, I would say, to make sure that we are running government efficiently, providing quality and timely services to Manitobans. And I would say the same thing would go for Crown Corporations. So we certainly do want to make sure that Crown Corporations are running efficiently, effectively, certainly not overburdened with excess, I would say, management or operational excess. And that's why we do have Crown Corporations reporting to Treasury Board as well. So certainly there is a degree of oversight when it comes to Crown Corporations, and we do want to make sure they are running effectively and efficiently. And to the member's point, that can be reflective certainly of rate charges to consumers. And that's why we take the operations of Crown Corporations seriously.
I want to thank the minister for the question and for clarity. I would tell the minister that the questions regarding hydro are in order, and there is a line item in the estimates book that that indicates that. The honourable member for St. James.
I thank you, Mr. Chair, for providing clarity on that question. I'll just ask the minister again in a somewhat more succinct way here. Given we saw 8% increases in O&A last fiscal, given the hydro is projecting 11% increase in O&A this year, does the minister have concerns about these rapidly escalating costs of operating an administration at Manitoba Hydro?
Order. I would ask for the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and clearly, in respect of the question and reflecting on my first answer, obviously we're always concerned about operational activities at our Crown corporations. Obviously, we want to be mindful of that. We do appoint board members to monitor the day-to-day activities over there, and obviously the CEO and management are responsible for the operations of Manitoba Hydro. Always mindful of that we're providing timely services to, in this case, Manitoba Hydro ratepayers, and we want to make sure we do have staffing there to make sure that those things are addressed, especially when it comes to winter operations and storms that may occur in the fall and the spring. We want to make sure that hydro is not out of service for too long. So certainly we keep an eye on staffing there and the operations side of it. I will say there's certainly oversight when it comes to rate setting. We know Manitoba Hydro recently asked for a 3.6% increase at the Public Utilities Board. I understand the Public Utilities Board is reviewing that application now, and we'll probably be having hearings in the near future. And expectation we'll probably have a ruling sometime this summer. I will say, since we have taken the bold and historic steps in reducing both the water rental rates and the fee charged on the debt to Manitoba Hydro, reducing those rates in half for this year for Manitoba Hydro, we're able to save Manitoba Hydro $180 million. Clearly that will help stabilize Manitoba Hydro financially, and it will in turn reduce rate increases to Manitoba ratepayers, Manitoba Hydro ratepayers. I believe the Manitoba Hydro is now requesting a 2.5% increase as opposed to the 3.6 increase that was previously asked. So we've taken these bold measures. I know previous governments had doubled those respective rates. We felt It was in the best interests of Manitobans to reduce those respective rates in half this year alone, reducing rates to Manitobans to the tune of $180 million. So we do want a strong Manitoba Hydro. We certainly believe it is the crown jewel for Manitoba. And I think it can be an economic driver for Manitoba as well if it is managed properly. And we do have the regulatory framework around it to allow it to be a driver for economic development. And I would go further to say that to be an economic driver for Manitoba, Manitoba Hydro has to respond in a timely manner to requests made by Manitobans for service. And we think that is certainly paramount as we go forward. I would also say that we do want a strong Public Utilities Board to monitor Manitoba Hydro. And in fact, this budget this year, we increased the budget for the Public Utilities Board by $2 million. So we want to make sure that the Public Utilities Board have the resources and has the manpower to effectively review the applications by Crown corporations such as Manitoba Hydro. So I would say the bold steps that we have taken this year in terms of the water rental and the debt guarantee reduction to those fees will help create a stronger Manitoba Hydro into the future. It will reduce rate shock to Manitobans. And by our added investment of $2 million to the Public Utilities Board to make sure they are adequately staffed and have the right resources or have the ability to acquire the right resources to review the applications, I think we will also have a
Honourable
strong
Minister's time is up.
Public Utilities.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I do want to, there's a lot of information put forward there, and I am looking forward to later asking the Minister about his government's work of dismantling the Public Utilities Board and their role in that. And I do look forward also to asking the Minister about some of the issues that we know businesses and industry are facing in getting service requests responded to. We're hearing months-long delays, and in fact, it's creating a very challenging environment for the expansion of industry and business, and I'd be curious to know if the Minister is hearing the same. But back to the question that we were asking and hoping for some clarity on, I did ask the Minister about his concern about the quickly rising operating and admin costs at Hydro. I know he did mention that staffing is important. I find that it's an interesting response given the Minister does represent a government that cut over 900 jobs at Hydro only a handful of years ago. So I guess I'm hearing him say that maybe that was a mistake, that they shouldn't have made over 900 job cuts at Hydro, and that he feels that they should be rehiring those people that his government forced Hydro to cut. But I will go back to the core question about this huge increase in operating and admin costs. I'm hearing the Minister, he's sort of, we're not really getting to the meat of his answer. I would like to ask him again, does he have concern about it? And he did say that they are concerned about financial management at Hydro, which is good to hear him say that. But I would like to hear what he's done about it. As the Minister accountable for Manitoba Hydro, what has he done? What has been expressed to Manitoba Hydro, either through himself or his department, to Hydro, in terms of asking them about these giant increases in operating and admin costs? Again, there's a direct line between an 11% jump in operating and admin costs and Hydro rate setting. Just like there's a direct line between massive overruns in IT projects at MPI and rates for Manitobans that they pay for their car insurance. So hoping the Minister can tell us what has he done in response to these giant increases in operating admin costs at Hydro.
The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Certainly a few things in respect of, call it, government oversight when it comes to Manitoba Hydro and in fact, most of the Crown corporations. We do have the Crown Corps before the Treasury Board on a fairly regular basis. I would also say the respect of Manitoba Hydro, Manitoba Public Insurance, the Public Utilities Board obviously set rates for both of those. So the Public Utility Board, in fact, currently will be reviewing the submission for their general rate application that has been supplied by Manitoba Hydro. And in reviewing the documentation that's supplied, the Public Utilities Board will clearly be reviewing the operations at Manitoba Hydro. And in terms of the question the member posed, Public Utilities Board will be reviewing the changes in the operational costs at Manitoba Hydro. I will say Manitoba Hydro will be impacted by the pandemic as well. Clearly, they will be impacted by supply chain issues that we've seen pretty well every industry impacted by that. Clearly, Manitoba Hydro are also going through an integrated resource plan. And that I know has taken some additional staff and management as well. And I think they've been hiring some resources to help put that plan together. So I'm sure that will have an impact in terms of the operational side of things. Clearly, I certainly have discussions with the board chair. I think we have a very competent board chair and Mr. Kennedy in charge there. So we're certainly having regular discussions. I certainly understand too our Crown Secretariat under the Department of Finance does have ongoing discussions with management at Manitoba Hydro as well. So certainly, and when the member talks about cost overruns, and you reference cost overruns, well, we don't want a situation to happen that happened under previous governments where we had a $4 billion cost overrun on capital when it comes to kiosk and the bipole. That's why we're engaging the Public Utilities Board in the operations at Manitoba Hydro. I know that's something the previous government decided to ignore when the critical decisions to move forward on capital investments were being made. There was no oversight by the Public Utilities Board. We're taking a different view to that. In fact, as I mentioned, we are increasing the budget for the Public Utilities Board to make sure that they have proper oversight to Manitoba Hydro. And that oversight will obviously look at the operations of Manitoba Hydro. And I think we'll have a view to any capital investments that are being made within the province as well. And clearly they will be monitoring to determine what the proper rates will be for Manitobans, and they will clearly be identifying any operational, I will call it, irregularities that may stand out. So we certainly look forward to the ruling coming from the PUB when it comes to the analysis of the general rate application currently before the Public Utilities Board.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
Thank you. I appreciate the response, and I think it's just important to put a fine point on it here that the minister has not expressed that they've taken a single action to help restrict or curb those huge increases in operating and admin costs at Hydro. And again, I just want to tie that directly to rates. The 7% bump last year equals 2.8% rate increase, and this year's 11% bump is, I haven't done the math, but it's probably close to a 3.5–4% increase. So I hope the minister understands why this is a critical question and why it's concerning to hear that he or his government have not taken any action. I didn't hear him say that he expressed to the board chair that this was something that needed to be brought under control. What he did say was that the Public Utilities Board would be reviewing operating and admin costs at Hydro. And he's right, that is a role of the Public Utilities Board. Unfortunately, what we've seen is that under this government, rulings at the Public Utilities Board don't really have any value. And I'll draw the attention of the Minister to directive from the Public Utilities Board 6919, which directed Hydro in 2019 to use a 1% escalation rate for projecting operating and admin increases. And the purpose of that order was to limit the impact of those operating and admin increases on rates on Manitobans. And so we've seen since 2019, obviously I've already outlined last year 7%, this year 11%. That's 8 times, 11 times what the Public Utilities Board directed Manitoba Hydro to restrict their increases to. So can the Minister comment on why he thinks there's a value to having the Public Utilities Board review operating and admin costs at Hydro if they're not going to be required to follow that directive?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's interesting to see a newfound interest by the NDP in Manitoba Hydro, and actually in the Public Utilities Board as well. I mean, they chose to circumvent the Public Utilities Board in the process in the past. So I find it interesting now where they think it's good to have the Public Utilities Board have a look at Manitoba Hydro. And clearly, that's the principle that we're following. We're trying to develop a strong Manitoba Hydro. That's why we've been taking steps to reduce the water rental rates and the debt guarantee charges to Manitoba Hydro. $180 million in this year alone for Manitoba Hydro ratepayers and Manitoba Hydro. So significant and bold steps, I would say, taking it by this government to making sure Manitoba Hydro remains stable going forward, and Manitoba Hydro ratepayers are not faced with rate shock. And yes, we firmly believe in the Public Utilities Board and the rulings they made. And to the member's point, I'm sure the Public Utilities Board would be reflective of any previous orders they made, and I'm sure the ruling coming forward will be reflective of previous orders they've made. And in terms of looking at the operational side of Manitoba Hydro, we certainly want to make sure that the Public Utilities Board has the ability and has the resources to do all of that diligent work that is required in reviewing this general rate application. That's why we're taking steps to add $2 million to their budget this year, to the Public Utilities Board, to make sure they do have those resources. So we certainly look forward to the ruling coming forward by the Public Utilities Board. And as I say, they are the regulator when it comes to rates, and I'm sure they will be making comments when it comes to the operational side. Again, I will say in general terms, we want to make sure that Manitoba Hydro is running as efficiently as possible and providing quality service to Manitobans. Going back and wearing my economic development hat, and I guess the Minister of Finance is always interested in economic development as well for fiscal reasons. And I think Manitoba Hydro should be a driver when it comes to economic development here in Manitoba. And my conversations with the chair have been reflective of that I want Manitoba Hydro to be responding to its customers in a timely fashion. And any delays will negatively impact economic development activity here in Manitoba. Now, whether that be on a personal level or at the corporate level as well. We want Manitoba Hydro to be respectful of the citizens that they serve.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
I thank the chair and the minister for the response. A finer point on here on this, and to summarize what we've heard, it does seem that the minister has been incapable of providing any clarity on what his government has done in response to the failure to follow that pub order that we identified, 6919. It's clear that he's not engaged or in the game when it comes to overseeing these significant increases in operating and admin costs we're seeing in hydro. Why is that important? Because this will have a direct relationship impact on rates for Manitobans. And I think it's clear that this is part of a pattern of mismanagement or poor management we've seen from this government. And we can look at hydro, we can look at MPI and see more examples of that poor management. And unfortunately, that poor management is very expensive for Manitoba Hydro ratepayers. The minister did open the door repeatedly there through his frequent reference to his government's purported support for the Public Utilities Board. So I do want to just dig in a bit on that question. The minister has repeatedly stated that his government is funding the Public Utilities Board, that they're adding $2 million. I would like to just ask the minister just to get a better understanding of his sense of the bill that his government has passed, which is no longer before the House, which hopefully will allow us to discuss it a bit here at this table. And I would like to ask the minister if it's his understanding, whether his understanding aligns to mine in terms of the impact of this bill, which is that this bill removes the Public Utilities Board from playing a role in assessing rate setting and instead changes the Public Utilities Board role in reviewing rates to ensuring that hydro is meeting the financial targets outlined in the bill. Said differently, the bill that this minister and his government passed effectively did away with the role of the Public Utilities Board. They're no longer responsible for actually helping to determine what the appropriate hydro rate increase that is required is. They're not developing or they're not doing those determinations based on hydro's financial needs or based on hydro's ability to service their debts. The Public Utilities Board role now has been reduced to simply determining whether or not hydro will meet the financial targets for hydro that were set out in the bill that the minister and his government passed. Effectively, what that means is that cabinet members, cabinet ministers, are deciding what type of hydro rates hydro needs to be obtaining in order to meet financial targets outlined in the bill. So the minister's chuckling, but I do look forward to hearing his perspective on this. So I'll say simply, does he agree that the bill that his government passed took away a significant amount of responsibility and the role of the pub and gave it, and does he agree that that responsibility was handed to himself and members of his cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think it's an interesting interpretation of the legislation that's been passed by members opposite. I know they don't like the Public Utilities Board and oversight for Crown corporations, We believe that it is certainly what Manitobans want, is an independent regulator to set rates for Manitobans. And we know the opposition continues to put false information out there for Manitobans, and they'd like Manitobans to believe that, yeah, the cabinet's setting the rates for Manitoba Hydro. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. That's why we have the general rate application before the Public Utilities Board now. And clearly, as I mentioned, we're strengthening the Public Utilities Board to make sure they have the proper resources and oversight to review the applications that are before them, coming from Manitoba Hydro. We want to see a strong Manitoba Hydro. That's why we've developed targets for them, debt equity targets for Manitoba Hydro. That's why we've taken the bold step to reduce both the water rental rates and the debt guarantee rates by half, saving Manitoba Hydro $180 million this year in terms of transfers to the government of Manitoba. So by taking these, I will say, bold steps, we think our crown jewel will be in a stronger position as we move forward. And also, as I said, we're going to have Public Utilities Board in a stronger position as well. And we know we've had to take some bold steps because the way when we came into office and how we inherited the financial situation of Manitoba Hydro. Manitoba Hydro currently have a $24 billion debt. And the debt servicing charges alone on $24 billion of debt are substantial. Now, I know the previous government tried to mislead Manitobans by saying, oh, don't worry, these capital investments that we're making won't cost Manitoba ratepayers a nickel, or I think the term was a penny. But the reality is could be nothing more from the truth. $4 billion in cost overruns at Kiosk and Bipole 3 created a $24 billion debt load for Manitoba Hydro. So again, if we were in Manitoba Hydro Committee, I would have all the dollars and cents figures in front of me in terms of the interest charges that Manitoba Hydro is paying each and every year because of the $24 billion worth of debt. Previous governments didn't really care about what debt Manitoba Hydro was in. Clearly we do, and we're trying to set some targets through prudent fiscal management for Manitoba Hydro, and at the same time keep rates low for Manitoba Hydro ratepayers. That's why we've taken the bold moves in terms of the $180 million that I spoke of, and clearly have an eye on the management at Manitoba Hydro, and at the same time be mindful of investments we're making here on infrastructure within Manitoba. And how do we use Manitoba Hydro to create wealth as well, and making sure that we are getting value for our money and value for our clean, green electric product that we do produce here in Manitoba. So we know there's newfound interest in business from all over the world that want to come to Manitoba to acquire and use our green energy. And we'd like to see that happen here in Manitoba as well. So that's why Manitoba Hydro is working on their integrated resource management plan. That's why the government is pursuing an energy policy. And we look forward to those things working quite nicely together for future development here in Manitoba.
The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think it's important that we respect each other in these types of committees, and that we offer respect to those on the other side of the aisle, regardless of what party we're in. The minister, in response to my question, suggested that I was putting false information on the record, or that I was somehow being dishonest in my question or that I was presenting things in an inaccurate way. And I do want to give the minister an opportunity to clarify where I was inaccurate or where I was wrong in my statement. I want to be clear again, the bill that his government supported and that he supported, Bill 36, outlined, and the minister said it himself, we set debt to equity targets. Those are his words he just used. That bill outlines debt to equity targets, financial targets for Manitoba Hydro, which are the single biggest determinant of rate setting on a go-forward basis. That's not based on Manitoba Hydro's financial needs. It's not based on projected needs to service debts for hydro. It's based on what PC politicians came up with as a formula that ended up in a bill. And I sat here in this very room and over 50 people, 50 different Manitobans, not people wearing orange sweatshirts or Manitoba NDP members, over 50 Manitobans came into this very room to express their concern about what I just said, which is that they were concerned that the Public Utilities Board and its role was being undermined because that legislation set out debt to equity targets that were the single biggest determinant of rate setting going forward. So I would again ask the minister, does he agree or does he not agree that the bill they put forward ultimately results in government setting rates instead of the Public Utilities Board?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I think it's a complete stretch that that piece of legislation would infer that government is setting the rates for Manitoba Hydro. Nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is, when we came into office, Manitoba Hydro, or Manitoba now has a $24 billion debt. $24 billion of debt at Manitoba Hydro. And that includes the $4 billion of cost overruns on the capital projects under the NDP's watch that the NDP got into without any oversight from the Public Utilities Board, I may add. $24 billion of debt generates debt servicing costs for Manitoba Hydro of $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year. I want the member to think about that for a little while. $1 billion Manitoba Hydro is paying for interest to service $24 billion of debt that the NDP left behind. The member should also know that $1 billion of debt servicing costs represents 40% of Manitoba's hydro's revenue. 40% of Manitoba's revenue, Manitoba Hydro's revenue, goes to servicing debt. $1 billion a year. So 40% of the revenue generated by Manitoba Hydro at the hands of Manitoba Hydro customers goes to servicing debt. I would suggest to the member opposite that the biggest single factor that determines rates for Manitobans is the debt servicing fee, when 40% of the revenue gets eaten up by debt servicing costs. I would like to take that, like to see the member opposite do the math on that.
The Honourable Member for St. James.
I appreciate the opportunity to engage a bit in terms of questions relating to Bill 36 and the impacts. I am disappointed. It's very disappointing to hear that the minister doesn't seem to understand how that bill was structured, or doesn't seem to understand that ultimately we now have a scenario where we have political actors deciding hydro rates instead of the Public Utilities Board. I know that those concerns are shared with a huge number of Manitobans, many of which showed up here in this very room to express those concerns. Unfortunately, they weren't heard by this minister's predecessor. Doesn't sound like they would have been heard by the current minister either. That's concerning. And the reason it's concerning is because for Manitobans, the number one concern is ensuring that we're not overpaying for our energy. And in our current scenario, or under our current situation where we have Bill 36 in effect, Manitobans will never know, because ultimately hydro rates are not being set in response to hydro's financial needs, in response to their ability to service their debts. Hydro's rates are being set by PC politicians at a cabinet table. That's not right. Hydro rates should always be set by independent experts. And it is a shame that this government feels that they know more than experts in energy who show up as interveners at pub hearings. I would like to move on now to talk a little bit about the Wall report. And I would like to just ask the minister a couple of questions in relation to that. Specifically in the fall, the Wall report, in response to the Brad Wall report, the former minister said that the PC government was committed to further privatization of Manitoba Hydro. And in particular, he agreed with the Wall report that Manitoba Hydro should look at selling off or shutting down, quote, and this is from the report, not NDP language, this is from the report, non-core functions. Look at selling off or shutting down non-core functions. Can the minister tell us if he supports the selling off or shutting down of non-core functions at Manitoba Hydro, and if so, which ones?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to be reflective and putting things in context for the member, and I hope for any Manitobans that may want to be reading Hansard transcript at sometimes in the future, the $24 billion of debt that Manitoba Hydro now sees itself in represents $18,000 of debt for each and every Manitoban. So a bit of a startling figure when you come to think about it and associate that with the ongoing debt servicing costs as well. And if we ever get to a point in trying to reduce that number. And clearly, and I don't know if the member is opposite like budgets or not, but budgets provide targets. And you know, if you don't have targets, to me, there's a lack of accountability. And clearly, that's what the government is providing for Manitoba Hydro, quite frankly, is targets. And you need some targets and you need some accountability. And we've got mechanisms in place to make sure that Manitoba Hydro is accountable. And in fact, the legislation that was passed really clarifies the roles of government. It clarifies the role of Manitoba Hydro, and it clarifies the Public Utilities Board roles and responsibility as well. And the legislation talks about greater rigor and accountability as well. And the one component that the legislation does talk about is any Manitoba Hydro capital projects. Now, we know, and that's what the Wall report clearly pointed out, that there was a lack of oversight when it came to capital projects. And previous government had bypassed the Public Utilities Board altogether when it came to the capital projects. In fact, mega capital projects. And it probably, because of that action, probably had a bearing on the $4 billion of cost overruns at Kiosk and Bipole 3. So again, substantial cost overrun that continue to be a burden to Manitoba Hydro, and quite frankly, continue to be a burden to Manitoba Hydro ratepayers. So by strengthening the Public Utilities Board and the oversight there, those type of actions or lack of actions won't happen in the future, because any of the capital projects for the future will have to go before the Public Utilities Board through this legislation. So I think that provides strong oversight to Manitoba Hydro. I think it should also send a signal to Manitobans and Manitoba ratepayers in particular that this government values the oversight by a strong, independent corporation such as the Public Utilities Board. Clearly, we're getting into a discussion about the Wall report. And again, the premise behind the Wall report was to have a look at what transpired over the last few years in terms of some of the capital projects and some of the lack of oversight that occurred during the development of those capital projects. So I believe the report brought forward 51 recommendations, and there's a number of categories in those recommendations, and certainly one of them being the Manitoba Hydro mandate. And I think that's where the member was going in terms of his question today. And I would just say from my perspective, clearly the legislation spells out the mandate for Manitoba Hydro. And again, I'm firm believer that Manitoba Hydro is a crown jewel for us, and we want to make sure that Manitoba Hydro is responsive to the ratepayers it serves.
The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I again do just quickly have to I cannot emphasize enough that what the minister stated in terms of his government's purported efforts at quote unquote strengthening the Public Utilities Board, that is not accurate. That it cannot be emphasized enough that his government has ultimately undermined the core purpose of the Public Utilities Board. So it doesn't matter if you give them an extra $10 million or $20 million. You can fund it all you want, but if you've completely and totally undermined their core purpose, which is to set rates to ensure Manitobans pay as little as possible, and that is the very oversight that Manitobans want. The minister has stated here that Manitobans want good oversight, strong oversight over rate setting. That's exactly what the Public Utilities Board did. That's what they were mandated to do. But this government changed direction on Manitobans. We don't have that defender of our interests in place anymore because rates are now being set by PC politicians. And that's just a fact. And the minister can't, there's nothing that he can say that will change that fact. What they have done is they have changed the role of the Public Utilities Board as it relates to oversight over capital projects. That is accurate. There's no denying that that is something that has been included in Bill 36. But that is one function of the Public Utilities Board. The function that we are talking about here is rate setting. So it cannot be emphasized enough that that is simply just absolutely not true, and that the Public Utilities Board has been drastically weakened by this government. And that was, again, the position that was expressed by over 50 people who came here to tell this PC government as much. I did ask the minister a question about the Wall report. He sort of touched on it a bit, but I do want to give him another opportunity to answer it. And I should state, the contents of this report were very concerning for Manitobans, because this was a report that was ultimately came at the request of this government. They accepted that report. They then made an announcement that they were going to be enacting the recommendations of that report. And one of the recommendations was that they should consider selling off or shutting down non-core functions. I'll ask the minister again, can he clarify for committee whether or not he supports that recommendation that Hydro should be shutting down or selling off quote unquote non-core functions? And if so, what are they? What does he propose that we sell off or shut down?
The Honorable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I can see that the member opposite and I are going to have to agree to disagree on the legislation that has been passed. You know, the member can say whatever he likes, and he clearly disagrees with my take on it, and I completely disagree with his interpretation of the legislation. And I don't think the Public Utilities Board has ever said, oh boy, I'm sorry, we feel that our ability to do our job has been circumvented by the legislation. I haven't heard anybody from the Public Utilities Board come forward and say that. The Public Utilities Board is currently reviewing the latest general rate application from Manitoba Hydro. We've given them more resources to do that. We've given the PUB more resources to hear interveners who want to come forward and voice their opinion on the general rate application before the board. That's an important component to the Public Utility Board process, having Manitobans come and present at the hearings. So again, it's an open and transparent process that the Public Utilities Board undertakes. And again, we're providing them more resources to do that. And certainly the Public Utilities Board will respond to questions brought forward by the interveners. I know the Public Utilities Board has a lot of questions for Manitoba Hydro as well. And that happens each and every time there's a general rate application by Manitoba Hydro. And Manitoba Hydro undertake those responses to the Public Utilities Board. And there's a lot of work goes into these general rate applications. And I would say Manitoba Hydro is being transparent through that process. And Public Utilities Board.
Order. If I could ask everybody in attendance that is sitting at the table, the level of conversation is getting fairly high and it's difficult to hear. So if you could please drop the volume or take it away from the table, that would be much appreciated. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that direction. So yeah, we're excited about the process that's unfolding. I know the 3.6 that was proposed has been reduced down to 2.5% because of some of the actions that have been taken by this government. And look forward to the outcome at the Public Utilities Board through the hearing process, and when the what's the name of the award? It's a what's brought forward. The ruling is brought forward. We look forward to that ruling probably sometime this summer as well. In respect of the Wall report, again, there's 51 recommendations came out of that report. Our government has never said that we would enact each one of those 51 recommendations. We said that we would respond to each of the 51 recommendations. So the member, I would just submit that he should be cautious when he says that the government will undertake all of the recommendations in the Wall report, because the facts of the matter are we said we would respond to each of the 51 recommendations, not that we would take action and enact each one of those 51 recommendations found in the Wall report. And again, the Wall report does make a lot of recommendations in terms of the mandate, in terms of oversight for Manitoba Hydro, government and regulatory oversight, and also talks quite a bit about the major capital planning as well. And I would say to move forward, the integrated resource planning framework was mentioned in the Wall report, and Hydro have taken that upon themselves to put together a framework for that integrated resource plan. And I would say probably something long overdue, and I think that plan at Manitoba Hydro should dovetail quite nicely into the provincial energy strategy as well. And that's something the Wall report did reference to, was a provincial energy strategy. So looking forward to having that energy strategy made public here in the next few months.
The honourable member for St. James.
Unfortunately, we didn't hear a response from the minister that in any way clarified for Manitobans who are concerned that about his government's commitment to enacting or responding to the recommendations from the Wall report, specifically the one that outlines that his government should sell off or shut down non-core functions. The minister hasn't chosen to respond to that question. I don't think a third go is going to make a difference. So I'll just move on from that. I will ask him, though, the Wall report does call on the province to use public-private partnerships for major capital projects. We know this government is deeply interested and embraces public-private models for capital projects, as we've seen with their approach to building schools. Can the minister provide us with some examples of major capital projects he would direct Manitoba Hydro to use P3s for?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly our government has stated, and we certainly have no intent of selling off components or portions of Manitoba Hydro. Again, I just want to make abundantly clear, out of all of the recommendations, the 51 recommendations, again, we said we would respond to them. We did not say that we would take action and or enact all of those particular recommendations. So the one recommendation...
Order, could, again, it's conversation around the table is getting a little loud, and it's difficult to hear up here. So if you could please drop the volume or take it away from the table, that'd be much appreciated so we can hear from the questions and answers on this estimate session. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think our members got pretty excited when the conversation came up about public-private partnerships. And I could see the Minister of Education, his ears certainly lit up and his eyes lit up when there's a conversation about public and private partnerships going forward, because I know we're looking at developing, I believe, seven schools 9 schools over the next few years, potentially using public-private partnerships. And certainly the landscape has changed since the last time we looked at public-private partnerships when it came to building schools. And looks like we can build schools effectively, efficiently, faster, and high-quality standards using that public-private model. So certainly other jurisdictions have used it. We know we're using public-private partnerships on other infrastructure projects around Manitoba. We've used it a number of times on roadway infrastructure, and I think it's worked out quite successfully. And I say in terms of Manitoba Hydro, actually, I would suggest to the minister or to the member opposite that we actually do have public-private partnerships already. I mean, we have partnerships with First Nations in northern Manitoba in respect of both Wisquatam and respect of Kiosk as well. So I would say to enter into an arrangement with a private entity is not new for Manitoba Hydro. And, I wouldn't say all those partnerships are, 100%, but I think the willingness to partner and hopefully provide successful outcomes to all of those partners, that's why they were undertaken. So the concept is certainly not new. And I think that's what the Wall report was referencing, that that's something that Manitoba Hydro, and I guess in Manitoba government, could consider. Again, it would have to be in the best interest of Manitoba Hydro, and it would have to be in the best interests of Manitobans as well. So we do have plenty of instances and situations where government has worked with private companies and private entities in the past, and I'm sure that will continue to be the case. And a couple of classic examples within Manitoba Hydro through Wisquatam and Kiosk.
The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The minister said that the landscape has changed. Those are the words he just shared, and he was referencing that we're now in a landscape where P3s are I'm inferring from what he's shared that it's a better state, it's a better sort of set of conditions to explore the use of P3s. Could he help the community to understand what has changed within the landscape? Why are we in a different landscape than before, when under his previous premier they assessed the potential of exploring P3 model and rejected it? So what's different? How has the landscape changed?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the question from the member opposite on the public-private partnerships and the change in the landscape. Clearly, a lot has changed through the pandemic, and the business community will tell you that for sure. I think governments and I would say the private sector are always looking for ways to share risk. And clearly we have a lot more risk in front of us than we did prior to the pandemic. I mean, we are facing significant supply chain issues when it comes to almost every type of commodity, which creates obviously challenges in building. I know we're facing labor challenges as well. We're clearly facing high interest rates, much higher interest rates these days than we were pre-pandemic. So all of those types of things factor into the assessment when it comes to looking at private-public partnerships. I can tell you a lot of the construction that is going on now, in fact, I just had a couple of projects relative to schools come across my desk just in the last few days, where we're seeing a substantial increase in costs that we as government are having to bear, given the marketplace we're in. And this is what the Wall report also referenced as well, that tremendous cost overruns when Manitoba Hydro were constructing Kiask and Bipole. So a way to mitigate that risk of cost overruns is to enter into public-private partnerships. And clearly, government should be in the business of mitigating risk. I mean, at the end of the day, all of these costs end up getting passed on to Manitoba taxpayers or Manitoba ratepayers. So trying to be creative and coming up with methods to mitigate these risks seems like a wise undertaking to me. And obviously, all of these things have to be evaluated to make sure that it is responsible and that all the interests of Manitoba taxpayers are being addressed. So I would suggest that's what the Wall report is saying as well, that Manitoba Hydro, although probably acting as the general contractor in the latest couple of developments, may not have been in the best case to be a project manager. And clearly we saw the $4 billion in cost overruns there. So he's suggesting there may be an opportunity for the private sector to come on board to help mitigate some of the risks that we saw with the development of Manitoba Hydro projects recently. And I would say the same thing could be said for whether it be school projects or highway infrastructure projects. Chief Peguis Trail was an example of that. Certainly a number of governments are involved in public-private partnerships to try to mitigate the risks that we're seeing these days with, as I referenced, interest challenges, labor challenges, supply chain issues, increasing construction costs. All of those things are the new reality, quite frankly. So those are the things that we're trying to mitigate.
The honourable member for St. James.
Lots to unpack there, Mr. Chair. And what I did hear is that the minister would like to see a much more aggressive role for private business in meeting our energy needs here in Manitoba. He alluded to the fact that he would have liked to have seen a much bigger role for the private sector in the development of Kiask. I don't know if there's other dams or other large infrastructure projects that he also would say that about, but I would like to give him an opportunity just to be clear with the committee here. Does the minister feel that future energy needs in Manitoba should be met through private-public partnership? Given what he just outlined, that he feels that this is clearly a superior model to the one we've used historically.
The honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, I think we have to be clear with Manitobans that we already do have public-private partnerships when it comes to Manitoba Hydro. And I referenced the number of First Nations communities that are involved with Kiask and Wasquatum. So I don't think there's any projects, major capital projects on the books right now for Manitoba Hydro. So I can't really speak to the what-ifs on that front. I will say the Wall report clearly says it to government, you should be mindful of opportunities that may exist using public-private partnerships. And I would say it would be wise to take that advice. That's not saying that clearly we wouldn't get into that, looking at all types of options, whether it be Manitoba Hydro standalone or whether it be a public-private partnership. I would say it would be prudent of government, and in this case, prudent of Manitoba Hydro, to review all of those circumstances. At the end of the day, we have to be responsible to Manitobans and Manitoba Hydro ratepayers. So it would be prudent for governments and Manitoba Hydro to do the analysis on that front. And I'm also reminded that we have 2 wind farm projects here in Manitoba as well. And those particular projects are both a public with Manitoba Hydro and private investment. I would say substantial private investment in those 2 wind farms. So again, Manitoba Hydro does have a significant history of public-private cooperation on capital projects. So again, I would say it would be wise for Manitoba Hydro and governments to consider all options if we're going to get into another, I will call it a major capital development.
The honourable member for St. James.
I appreciate the minister's transparency that he's a strong supporter of a private role in meeting our energy needs, or that he really feels we should be looking very closely at that. I do think that there should be some, it does need to be said though that this referencing of the benefit agreements and partnerships with those Indigenous communities that benefited in the case of Wesquatam and Kiosk as being examples of P3s is highly misleading and is not in any way reflective of what most people would consider to be a P3 arrangement. Those communities were set up to be benefactors of those projects and the benefits that they brought forward. And those are not examples of the types of P3 projects that most people would consider as being an example of that type of an approach to getting public infrastructure built. So it is important to point out that that is misleading in a big way. I would like to move on now to talk about the energy policy. The minister's referenced this a couple times, and I do want to start just by giving the minister an opportunity to update this committee as to the status of that work. I'll remind the minister that work is currently at this point almost a year late. It was supposed to be brought forward approximately a year ago. There were some changes to the scope of that contract. However, still at this point, almost 2 years later, from the time that the RFP was initially issued, Manitobans have no line of sight on the status of that energy policy. The minister will know I've asked him about this in the House. We did not get an answer in the House. This is a great opportunity for him to provide clarity as to the status of that policy. So could the minister please update this committee on the status of this energy policy, which he has referenced earlier and which Manitobans are waiting to see?
The honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin our discussion about energy policy by saying that I believe Manitoba is in a tremendous place when it comes to the discussion about energy. We have the greenest energy probably in the country, notwithstanding Quebec for sure, but I would say we probably have the cleanest, greenest energy almost anywhere in North America, and I would put us up against almost anybody in the world. And I would suggest that is why we're seeing such an interest in the business community to come to Manitoba. And it's quite impressive to see the number of different sectors that require energy. And some of them require a lot of energy. And that's why it's so important for us to develop an energy policy. And that's why it's also so important that Manitoba Hydro develop an integrated resource plan. And that's why we put it in the legislation that Manitoba Hydro has to develop their integrated resource plan. Our government is committed to an energy policy, creating an energy policy. And I will submit to the member that yes, it's taken longer than I would have liked it to occur. Clearly, there's been a lot of work on that front. We have hired an independent consultant to help discussions and navigate that process. And there was quite a bit of work done on that front. I would say a lot of work was done, and at the same time, the whole energy conversation around the world has been evolving. And I think we had to take a step back and look at the evolving energy situation, not just in Manitoba, but around the world. And really does have implications going forward. And I think Manitoba Hydro has found this when they're developing their integrated resource plan, that they had to be flexible in that plan because things change, and things change quite rapidly. And that's what we're seeing on the broader energy front as well. So I would say when it comes to the energy policy discussion, lately there's been more of a focus on the economic development front. And how can we drive economic development through an energy policy? If we can develop an effective energy policy here in Manitoba with an eye on economic development and attracting people to Manitoba, attracting jobs to Manitoba, it can be a win-win for us into the future. So clearly Manitoba Hydro has to be at the table when we're discussing energy policy as well, because clearly Manitoba Hydro is the big player when it comes to energy for us in Manitoba. So you really can't have one without the other. So more of a concerted effort here lately, discussions with Manitoba Hydro and how their integrated resource management plan would fit into the energy policy that a government would develop, and how do we make sure that economic development and those opportunities are part of that energy policy discussion. So that's why it has taken a little longer, as I said, than I would have hoped. But I think with those sort of new focus on developing energy policy, I think we can come with a positive energy policy and have that before Manitobans this summer.
The honorable member for St. James.
I do appreciate the response from the minister, and I do appreciate hearing his sentiments about the potential that Manitoba Hydro creates for economic development in Manitoba. It's promising to hear him say those words. Unfortunately, we've had 7 years now of conservative governance in Manitoba, and I would invite the minister to share or tell me where I'm getting things wrong here. But unfortunately, Manitoba has fallen to the very back of the pack in Canada in terms of our use of our clean energy opportunity. And we've seen that in a number of reports, for example, as it relates to efficiency. Manitoba used to be one of the top provinces in the country as it relates to taking advantage of improving efficiencies to help reduce energy costs for residents, for Manitobans. We've made zero progress of any kind in advancing electric vehicle charging networks in this province. Absolutely none. When you compare us to other jurisdictions that are wealthy in terms of their hydroelectric resources like BC and Quebec, we are in the dust. We're talking there about a huge number of jobs and opportunities for good paying tool belt jobs for Manitobans. If we want to talk about just the simple work of further electrification in Manitoba, which arguably is one of the single biggest economic opportunities in Manitoba, the moving away from non-renewable imported fuels towards the use of renewable, abundant, made in Manitoba clean energy is the single greatest economic opportunity of our lifetimes. And yet, this PC government hasn't taken one step in advancing on that opportunity. And again, I invite the minister to tell me where I'm wrong on that. Not one step in that. Not one step in electrifying transportation, not one step in helping to electrify space conditioning or home heating or cooling, not one step in advancing the development of green, clean hydrogen in Manitoba, which we know is another significant energy-related opportunity. So it is good to hear the minister say those words. However, he represents a government that hasn't proven that in action. And that is a concern because of the missed opportunity. The scope of that missed opportunity is painful. It's painful to think about what we're missing out on because they haven't seen that opportunity or it hasn't been apparent to them. I would like to ask in relation to the policy, so the minister did say that we can expect that it's going to come this summer. If I'm wrong about that, he can correct me. That is good to know that it's forthcoming. I would like to ask the minister, because he's alluded to the IRP process happening at Hydro, about how the minister envisions the role of the energy policy and its influence and cascading down into planning at Hydro. And I'll give the minister just an opportunity to respond to that. What is the role of the energy policy in informing what Manitoba Hydro does on a go-forward basis?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate member raising some of these topics. I would say we've certainly taken a lot of steps. I know the member talked specifically about electric charging stations. I know those are being developed. I think there was some federal grant money that was available for charging systems. We've approved some of those around the province as well. I will mention Efficiency Manitoba as well. I'm not sure of the budget over at Efficiency Manitoba, but it is fairly substantial. And I think it is creating some opportunities for Manitobans to reduce their energy consumption. So a lot of work is going on that front, and we will continue to try to strengthen Efficiency Manitoba. I think the discussion is certainly much broader in terms of our energy use here in Manitoba. I mean, we historically, and this is getting into the energy policy a little bit, historically have been very good at shipping our clean electricity outside of the province. And that really allows other jurisdictions to grow their economy and create jobs and wealth. I think as we work through this energy policy is how do we more effectively use that power here in Manitoba to power our economy and create opportunities for jobs and growth here in Manitoba. Because at the end of the day, it's economic activity that pays the bills. It pays the bills on hydro, on healthcare, education, and social services that Manitobans expect. So when I talk about Manitoba Hydro being an economic driver, that's what I want to see. I want to see Manitoba Hydro be a catalyst for investment here in Manitoba. And I think now is a tremendous opportunity for us because companies all over the world are looking for our green energy. And I think if we get this energy policy correct and show the world that we have an effective energy policy and a very strong Crown corporation that can deliver power, we can show the world that we can deliver this, and we can create opportunities, and we can create jobs, and we can create wealth for Manitobans. That's exciting. And Manitoba Hydro have to be flexible. And that's why we're saying to Manitoba Hydro, you create an integrated resource plan that is flexible, so that as energy needs change, as energy needs increase in Manitoba, you have the flexibility to respond. So I think that is what is so critical in developing the IRP in Manitoba Hydro. And clearly that will fit into the energy policy as well, as the energy policy in Manitoba will be driven by economic development, with a lens from economic development. And I think that's important. We have tremendous opportunities here. I mean, we just ordered the City of Winnipeg through the ISIP program, which obviously we're supportive of, a number of electric buses. I think New Flyer will be supplying those buses to the city of Winnipeg. We have a tremendous innovative bus company here in Manitoba that are selling electric buses and other forms of zero-emission buses all over the world. So I think it's an opportunity for us to work with them and build on that resource they have. The member also mentioned hydrogen. We've got a number of companies we're working with on hydrogen development. There's a couple of companies that are looking at investing in Selkirk itself in terms of developing green hydrogen. So we're certainly excited about that. And obviously in discussion with a number of other companies when it comes to hydrogen. And I think there is a tremendous opportunity for Manitoba to get into that hydrogen market because of our green energy that we do have.
The honourable member for St. James.
So we didn't get a response to the question, which was, how does energy policy influence decision-making at Hydro? And I'll spell out the concern more clearly for the minister, which is things are a hot mess right now. If you speak with people, folks who are watching this situation closely, people who've been involved in energy for some time in Manitoba, the concern is this. We're now 2 years into the development of an energy policy. Hydro is 1 year into the development of an IRP process. The energy policy is supposed to set out government's direction, overall high-level strategic direction on what we should be seeking to accomplish as a province in terms of our energy goals, whether that be a net zero target at a given date in the future, or whether that be, a certain level of export of clean hydrogen to Germany, whatever that is. That policy then needs to, the direction given in that flows down to Manitoba Hydro, who then responds to that direction from the province and develops an IRP, a resource plan, that responds directly to that. So right now, instead of having a scenario where we have an energy policy that clearly gives Hydro its understanding of the province's strategic direction, we have a mess where we have an energy policy that's apparently not complete as of yet. We're 1 year into an IRP process at Hydro, and frankly, I don't know what they're developing an IRP in response to, because as far as Manitobans can tell, there's no strategic direction that's been offered. An IRP process is intended to help clarify how Manitoba Hydro will develop the capacity and energy needed in order to meet targets in a provincial energy policy. So the concern here, Minister, that I'm expressing to the Minister is that we have this scenario where we've got an unfinished policy, we've got a utility that in Manitoba Hydro that is far down the path of developing a plan that is not responding to any kind of direction. And this ultimately is all being done in a vacuum that has been created by this government, where there's just simply a bit of a Wild West situation where Hydro is not responding to any kind of government direction. And maybe that's because there's just simply was an absence of it for so long. I'd like to ask the Minister, does he have concerns about the fact that an IRP process we're 1 year into an IRP process that is being done without guidance from a provincial energy policy?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I appreciate the comments from member opposite. Clearly from the outside, and I appreciate his editorial version of that. Being on the inside, I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at now in terms of the conversations that are going on in respect of the IRP and in respect of the energy policy. I think it's important that Manitoba Hydro be part of those discussions because they are the energy provider here in Manitoba. And the member's right. It's about how we meld a policy, and then how does Manitoba Hydro fit into that energy policy especially through the IRP process. So that's exactly what we're trying to get right. And by basically putting these two items together, I think we can come up with a positive statement about energy here in Manitoba. And it will be reflective of the tremendous opportunities we have around green energy. And I expect the green energy will be attractive for many years to come. And I think also the price factor is also an important component that certainly individuals in the business community is looking at as well. And that's something that we can certainly weigh into the energy policy. And there's other opportunities, as the member did raise, about hydrogen development there, potential for gas development and those things in our energy policy. So I'm excited where we're at. Again, I'm not happy we didn't get here faster, but I'm certainly optimistic that we'll have a good product to show Manitobans very soon.
The honourable member for St. James.
Yeah, and I mean, the minister stated that will take the policy and the IRP, and I think he's put his hands together to suggest that we're going to squeeze those things together. I mean, that's just not the way that this work should be done. It's the same thing as saying, like in any business or corporation, it's the equivalent to having business units or managers develop plans without any kind of a vision or without being responsive at all to a higher level strategy. And you can't mesh or meld those things together after the case. So we do have a mess of a situation here that will result in more rework, more delays in Manitobans moving forward in the growth of a clean energy economy. I do want to ask the minister, because him and his colleagues frequently allude to Kiosk as having been an example of the NDP overbuilding energy. And I got an article that I would like to table with the committee here. And this article is focused on the proposed development of the Kivalliq line, which would run from Gillam to Nunavut. And the reason I'm tabling this article, and I would like the minister's commentary on what this article states, is that the communications officer, Bruce Owen, for Hydro, in this article states very clearly, in response to the request for Hydro to provide this energy to Nunavut, that Manitoba Hydro doesn't have more energy to give. And I would like to ask the minister if he can comment on that quote from Bruce Owen, and I can read the quote for him here. Manitoba Hydro, quote, Manitoba Hydro does not have the long-term supply of power to meet the future needs of the communities and mines in Nunavut. And this is in response to this request for a hydro line that's been put forward by the Nunavut government and those who are supporting this ask to build the line. So my question of the minister is, and in the context of this broader conversation around hydro policy, my question to the minister is, how does he respond to the fact that Manitoba Hydro is telling prospective customers that we do not have more energy to sell?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is a very broad question for sure. I will begin by saying that I know there's discussions going on this project. Quite frankly, I remember being aware of this project close to 7 years ago, actually. It came across my desk then. So it's been talked about for quite some time. And again, it's certainly on the radar, and it's been a pretty active file on a few fronts. So I know the proponents have been reaching out to Manitoba Hydro. I know Manitoba Hydro had a lot of questions around the development and the proposal, what that would look like. I know they did have a lot of questions prepared, and I think they were going back to the proponent to try to determine some of the details there to see what could be done and what could be achievable. This discussion really goes back to our previous discussion about energy policy and how do we best utilize the energy that we have currently, and potentially look at what energy may be required into the future. And as I talked about earlier, we are sending a lot of our power outside of Manitoba, particularly south to the United States, where they're using it for economic development opportunities. And that's why I think our energy policy should be reflective of economic development opportunities here in Manitoba. So any decisions about who we sell to outside of Manitoba has to be part of that energy policy and that dialogue. Again, to me, it's about providing the best value for that resource. And that's why the energy policy is so critical. And I think we just have so many opportunities in front of us. And we have opportunities coming to us each and every day, looking for our green energy, our relatively inexpensive energy here in Manitoba. So I think it's too early to write off this particular project, based on the comments from the communications person from Manitoba Hydro, because I know Manitoba Hydro are looking at it further. And certainly there's lots of development going on in the Kivalliq region, and I think we can find ourselves supplying more than just energy to that region. That's why we're making investments in the northern rail line into Churchill. We've lost a lot of that supply into that Kivalliq region. And I think once we get that rail line finished, we will see economic opportunities, and we'll get some of that supply chain back through Churchill up into the Kivalliq region, which will benefit that region and quite frankly, benefit Manitobans. So when we look at this particular power sale proposal, we, as government and as Manitoba Hydro, we have to figure out what is in the best value for Manitobans. Is the best value shipping our clean, green energy outside of Manitoba, or should we be focused on seizing opportunities that could potentially come our way? Because quite frankly, companies from around the world are knocking on our door. And how do we make sure that we can provide them the resources that they need to establish business here? Or conversely, businesses that are already here that want to grow. And we need to make sure that we can supply them that power that they need. So all of those things are part of the energy policy. And the energy policy right now has evolved because of the changing conversation around the world on energy. So it's an exciting time to be talking about energy, but it's a really exciting time to be in Manitoba talking about energy.
The honourable member for St. James.
I appreciate the response. I'll just ask the minister one last time here. Does he believe that Manitoba Hydro lacks the energy required to be able to further economic development here in Manitoba? Manitoba Hydro is on record in articles saying they do not have the power required to make a sale and to support this ask. That's, again, from an article. That's not coming from me. Can the minister just clearly state whether or not he believes Manitoba Hydro is lacking in energy capacity, and does he feel that we need to be developing more energy resources to meet those demands?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the question. And that's really a hypothetical question. I mean, if all of the potential projects that are coming to Manitoba to ask questions about establishing business here or expanding business here, you add up all of those, it's certainly a huge power ask. But again, who knows how many of those projects would actually come to fruition. So that's something that, you know, we're certainly weighing out. And also, we're looking at our, you know, the current contracts we have outside of Manitoba. In fact, we have contracts with Saskatchewan and Ontario as well. Ontario pretty small, but majority into the US. And we have to have the conversation about getting the value for the power that we're currently generating. And I think there's a real opportunity to attract more investment here in Manitoba as opposed to selling our, I'll use the term, I shouldn't use the term excess because it's not really excess, but at times it's excess power, but we do have our contracts in place. And as those contracts come up, should we be using that resource here in Manitoba instead of outside of the province? So those are all conversations that are ongoing. And whether we can get these companies to come to Manitoba and actually allow them to set up shop, I mean, those are discussions that continue to take place. And those are discussions we continue to have with Manitoba Hydro in terms of how they can supply hydro. Because some of these projects are, quite frankly, substantial power usage. So again, it's a changing world when it comes to energy use, and it's a changing dynamic when it comes to energy here in Manitoba. And exciting time and exciting opportunities for Manitoba, and I would say Manitoba Hydro.
The honourable member for St. James.
Thank you. I do have one last question for the minister. Last May in estimates, the minister was asked if he would agree to take respectful workplace training after some comments that were made at a business forum that were considered to be disrespectful towards women. I won't repeat the comments here, but I'm sure the minister remembers. He agreed to take respectful workplace training, saying, quote, "Going by memory, I believe I did take this course at one point in time, but I'm probably due to take that course again, and I will endeavor to undertake that," end quote. Can the minister update us on whether or not he took that training?
I will advise the members that this question is probably more appropriate when we talk about the minister's salary, not leading into the resolution portion.
So we'll do the resolutions.
So just for clarification, we will do resolutions, and then we'll do the resolution regarding the minister's salary, and that's where this question is better raised. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the member's question, yes, I did. And also just to clarify too on the, I referenced the 2.5% GRA earlier. It was actually 2%. So it's a 2% GRA application for 23-24 and for 24-25, not 3.5 as original. So I just wanted to clarify that. I thought it was 2, but somehow I had in my mind it was 2.5, but it's 2% application, and we'll see if the PUB will provide a multi-year ruling this summer.
Seeing no further questions, we will now move on to the resolutions section. Okay, we'll now resume on resolution. Resolution 7.2. Resolve that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $1,120,000 for finance, Crown services for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.3, resolve that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $3,502,000 for finance, fiscal policy, and corporate services for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass?
Pass.
The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.4, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $6,881,000 for finance, communications, and engagement for fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.1, resolved that there...
7.5.
We'll start that again. Resolution 7.5, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $2,559,000 for finance, treasury for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.6, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $17,218,000 for finance, compliance, and enforcement for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.7, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $10,792,000 for finance, Treasury Board Secretariat for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.8, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $2,329,000 for finance, policy, and planning secretariat for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Resolution 7.9, resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $2,583,000 for finance, intergovernmental affairs for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed. Okay. The last item to be considered for the estimates of this department is item 7.1 bracket A, the minister's salary, contained in resolution 7.1. At this point, we request the minister's staff leave the table for the consideration of this last item. The floor is now open for questions. No questions? Seeing none? We'll move on to the resolution. Resolution 7.1. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty a sum not exceeding $6,905,000 for finance, administration, and finance for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024. Shall the resolution pass? The resolution is accordingly passed.
I like it. That's-
Okay, so you can just say, this completes.
This completes the estimates of the Department of Finance.
You can say the next set of estimates.
And the next set of estimates to be considered by this section of the Committee of Supply is for tax credits. The hour being 5 p.m., committee rise.